Hi, I'm Dave. These are books. The complete title of this book is Unbroken, Unbroken, a World War II story of survival, resilience, and redemption. It was written by Laura Hillenbrand, the #1 New York Times best-selling author of Seabiscuit. It was published in 2010. It's a pretty new book. When I saw this book on a list of New York Times bestsellers, I was unfamiliar with author Laura Hillenbrand, and there's a picture of the author, and with Louis Zamperini, the subject of Unbroken. Unbroken tells the story of Louis Zamperini, an Olympic runner from Southern California and a bombardier in the United States Army Air Corps, who was taken prisoner by the Japanese. Mr. Zamperini served as a bombardier on the B-24 Liberator, and there's one of those on the cover, about which the author tells us the plane that no one wanted was a new bomber, Consolidated Aircraft's B-24 Liberator. Flat-faced, rectangular, and brooding, the B-24 had looks only a myopic mother could love. Crewmen gave it a host of nicknames, among them the Flying Brick, the Flying Boxcar, and the Constipated Lumberer, a play on Consolidated Liberator. Craning over the mountainous control panel, the pilot had a panoramic view of his plane's snout and not much else. Navigating the 9-inch wide Bombay catwalk could be difficult, especially in turbulence. One slip and you'd tumble into the bay, which was fitted with fragile aluminum doors that would tear away with the weight of a falling man. A pilot once wrote that the first time he got into a B-24 cockpit, it was like sitting on the front porch and flying the house. The sentiment was common. Flying it was like wrestling a bear, leaving pilots weary and sore. The B-24 was plagued with mechanical difficulties. It was one of the, if one of the 4 engines quit, staying airborne was challenging. There were several incidents in which B-24 tails dropped off in midair. The plane was winning a reputation for being delicate, especially in the skinny wings, which could snap off if struck in combat. Some of the men at Ephrata thought of the B-24 as a death trap, saying, "It's the flying coffin." My dad served as a bombardier on B-24s in World War II. I showed him the passages above about the B-24. After reading those paragraphs, he set the book down, sighed, and said, quote, "Glad I didn't know all of that," unquote. In her exploration of Mr. Zamperini's POW experiences, the author exposes the importance of dignity, humiliation, and self-esteem. Quote, "The crash of Green Hornet had left Louis and Phil in the most desperate physical extremity, without food, water, or shelter. But on Kwajalein, the guards sought to deprive them of something that had sustained them even as all else had been lost, dignity." Quote, "On Kwajalein, Louis and Phil learned the dark truth known to the doomed in Hitler's death camps, the slaves of the American South, and 100 other generations of betrayed people. Dignity is as essential to human life as water, food, and oxygen." We are introduced to the concepts of transfer of oppression and the fatal poison of irresponsible power. I found myself simultaneously fascinated and repulsed by the naked brutality of warfare as presented herein. Also, as a decades-long student of the Japanese code of contact known as Bushido, I was sobered by the permutations with which that way of life took during World War II. Here are a few of my favorite quotes from the book. Quote, "If they were going to die in Japan, at least they could take a path that they and not their captors chose, declaring in this last act of life that they remain sovereign over their own souls." Quote, "The POWs would pinch anything they could, often items they had no need for, risking a beating or worse for something as useless as a pencil box. The box itself was nothing. The theft of it was everything." Quote, "The paradox of vengefulness is that it makes men dependent upon those who have harmed them. believing that their release from pain will come only when they make their tormentors suffer. Quote, all he had left was his alcohol and his resentment, the emotion that, Jean Amory would write, nails every one of us onto the cross of his ruined past. Unbroken is dedicated to the millions of Allied servicemen and prisoners of war who lived the story of World War II. Ms. Hillenbrand states, many of these men never came home. Many others returned bearing emotional and physical scars that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. I come away from this book with the deepest appreciation for what these men endured, what they sacrificed for the good of humankind. I recommend Unbroken very highly to anyone with an interest in World War II, the Army Air Corps, Japanese militarism, prisoners of war and prisons, America during the 30s and 40s, and of that amazing generation of Americans which came of age during the Depression and World War II, my parents' generation. As an aside, I want to point out that the author, Laura Hillenbrand, is a survivor, if you will, of a situation called chronic fatigue syndrome, which colors or flavors her writing and her entire life. And you can read about that if you'd like. You can Google Laura Hillenbrand or the New York Times article that she wrote in 2004 about that, the title of which was A Sudden Illness. I read it. It's very moving. And I could see how that had something to do with the way she writes. Once again, the title of this book is Unbroken, a World War II story of survival, resilience, and redemption, written by Laura Hillenbrand, the #1 New York Times best-selling author of Seabiscuit, was published in 2010, pretty new book. I'm Dave. These are books.